highlight today comes from the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled "Battling Infectious Diseases in the 20th Century." I don't you know if you remember, but a while back there was quite controversial story here in the United States, particularly in California, because there was an outbreak of measles because certain parents in certain areas of California were refusing giving their children vaccines because they fear that vaccines are unnatural. Well, they obviously are, like any other technology, because they believe that vaccines are unsafe, which is not true. They are extremely safe. And some also believe that vaccines are somehow linked to autism, which is also not true. It has been repeatedly shown that vaccines are not linked whatsoever to autism. But in any case, the Wall Street Journal published this long story that it's intended to highlight how effective vaccines are at ending certain diseases. So we could call this kind of visualization a heat map. The data is represented by the intensity of the color. The intensity of the color represents the number of cases of this particular disease per 100,000 people per state, right? The redder the color, the larger number of cases per 100,000 people in each one of those states. And the x-axis is time. And the black line represents the time when the vaccine was introduced in the country, when it started being applied to the population in general. And the patterns that these visualizations highlight are pretty striking. Before the vaccine, there were tons of cases in all states. Right after the vaccine got introduced, there were barely any cases of measles in this particular case. This is a very powerful way of presenting, and very powerful and very compelling way and persuasive way of presenting a story. The graphic has been critiqued, by the way, by certain people because the color palette is not a colorblind safe, which is actually true. Perhaps a different color palette that didn't use different colors but only shades of one single color would have been a little bit more appropriate. But I believe that is still a very, very good project. The next one comes from the Washington Post. The Washington Post, by the way, if you don't follow the Washington Post, you should start following it right away because lately they are producing some of the finest data journalism and graphics and infographics and visualization, at least in the United States. So this is a story called America's Great Housing Divide. Again, you can find it very, very easily through Google. It has text, obviously, you can read it. But then the wonderful thing down here is the interactive visualization. So it detects where you live. I live in this zip code, 33186. So now you know where I live in case you want to pay a visit to Miami at some point. You can come to South Miami and we can have coffee together or something like that. I'm not kidding about that, by the way. You can let me know if you're in town, and I will try to make the time to meet in person. But anyway, the graphic is wonderful in the sense that you can change this, obviously, and I can put here, I don't know, a completely different zip code, and then click, and then that zip code will be, I don't know if this is working. There you go, it's working. So I click there, and it changed the zip code, and then you can select any other zip code just by clicking on the map, and it will give you access to that particular zip code. And it's a great example of how to present the same data in multiple ways because the map shows you the change in home values since 2004. But then whenever you click on a particular zip code, you get a much more detailed portrait of the variation of housing prices in this particular zip code across the years. So since 2004 up to 2014. And then down here, there are several very interesting summary maps, for example, so you can see which areas suffer the most or the least in comparison to your particular zip code. There we have another one there. And then we have this index chart over here. I believe that this is if you read it carefully, I'm just scrolling through it quite quickly, but I would encourage you to explore it and read it with detail. You will see that it's a great example, I believe, how to combine text and visuals to end up with a very compelling and very informative story.